Okay, let's dive in. Picture this. A really packed city square, right?
Huh.
Thousands of people just going about their day.
Mm-hmm.
Now imagine each one is carrying something, but you can't see it. It's like this heavy weight on their shoulders.
Oh.
Not, a physical bag, but an invisible one. A kind of shared, unspoken sense of,
Mm.
well, something. What do you think fuels that feeling?
Yeah, that image, it really strikes a chord, doesn't it? It's fascinating how we might not consciously label it, but there often is this underlying unease, something fundamental happening just beneath the surface of our um, orderly lives.
So when we talk about this invisible cage, are we essentially getting at how society, well, to function? It needs us to keep a lid on certain parts of ourselves.
Exact.
The raw stuff,
Yeah.
aggression, desire, the things that could, potentially mess up the system.
Precisely. Civilization is fundamentally a process of channeling, of taming, maybe. We trade that sort of untamed freedom of our primal urges for the structure and the relative safety of social norms. But those urges, they don't just evaporate, they transform. And sometimes, yeah, they manifest in pretty unexpected ways.
And this transformation, it doesn't just disappear into thin air.
Mhm.
You mentioned this unease. How does that actually take shape in our world today? Can you give some examples?
Well, think about how we react when someone steps way out of line, violates a social norm, you know?
Okay.
The intensity of that reaction sometimes, the almost like ritualistic condemnation we can see, could that be, partly at least, a reflection of a deeper shared anxiety about our own suppressed impulses?
Ah, interesting.
It's almost like by publicly casting out someone else's transgression, we're trying to purify ourselves in a way.
That's a really compelling thought. But I mean, isn't it also possible that our reactions are just driven by a genuine need for fairness?
Yeah.
Wanting to protect people from harm?
Oh, absolutely. That's a really crucial point. The pursuit of justice, preventing harm, those are incredibly powerful motivators, no question. But maybe the almost performative aspect of some public shaming, the sheer speed and intensity it can reach, that might suggest something else is going on too. A deeper psychological need, perhaps. A collective attempt to manage something inside ourselves.
It feels like from when we're really young, we're being shaped,
Yeah.
right? All those no's, the don't touch that. It's not just teaching basic manners. It's like our first lesson in navigating this whole complex web of rules. And eventually, those outside rules become internal, almost like they're just part of who we are.
And what's really remarkable is how well that internalization works most of the time. What we think of as just civilized behavior is often the result of incredibly deeply ingrained self-regulation. We learn to manage our impulses so well that these controls can feel like they are us, like our authentic selves.
But what's the consequence of constantly pushing down these really fundamental drives? Does it actually get rid of them? Or do they just, leak out somewhere else?
That's the thing, the energy. It doesn't just disappear, it has to go somewhere. It seeks an outlet, often in disguised forms.
Okay, like how?
Think about aggression again. Societies have laws, police, courts, all to control physical violence, right?
Sure.
Yet that underlying aggressive drive, it can pop up in competitive sports, maybe the cutthroat business world, even in subtle ways like passive aggression or systemic stuff, inequalities, subtle cruelty sometimes. The impulse isn't gone, it's just redirected.
Okay, that raises some, slightly unsettling points. What about other primal urges, like sexuality? How does society handle that huge part of being human?
Oh, sexuality is a fascinating case study, isn't it? Societies build these incredibly intricate frameworks around it. Rules, expectations, courtship rituals, marriage conventions, all sorts of taboos. But obviously this doesn't get rid of sexual desire. Instead, we see it sort of bubble up in other places. Maybe the way advertising uses sex constantly. Or, the huge market for pornography. It can create this weird culture that feels both really repressed and overtly sexual at the same time. An obsession, almost.
This really makes you wonder then, who gets to set these rules? Who defines right and wrong? And crucially, who benefits from those definitions? Morality and power seem, tangled up.
Deeply tangled, exactly. Throughout history, you see people in power using moral codes, think religious institutions controlling sex and relationships, or political regimes regulating art and speech as tools Tools for social engineering, basically, for maintaining dominance.
Hmm.
And you could argue that contemporary debates, things like political correctness, are, in a way, just the latest version of this very old struggle over who sets the moral agenda.
But is it always just top-down, like power structures dictating everything? Do we as individuals have any say, any agency in shaping what we think is right or wrong?
That's such a critical question, the dynamic between society and the individual. And yes, while powerful institutions definitely shape the moral landscape, individuals aren't just passive clay. There's constant push and pull.
Okay.
However, that internal compass we develop, that little voice inside that judges us, some might call it the superego. It plays a huge role. It sort of makes us our own jailers, in a sense.
The superego, right? That nagging voice, the one that makes us feel guilty. Can you give some everyday examples? How does this internal judge actually work in our lives?
Sure. Think about maybe a woman who feels intense pressure to excel in her career, but also feels guilty for not spending enough time with her family, or vice versa.
Right, the classic bind.
Exactly. These often conflicting societal ideals get internalized, so she feels guilty kind of no matter what she chooses. Or a man who feels ashamed to show vulnerability because he's absorbed the message that real strength means never showing weakness. Even think about parents. Maybe they hated how their own parents disciplined them, but then they find themselves using the exact same methods with their kids. It's driven by this internalized idea of what proper parenting looks like, even if they consciously disagree.
So, okay, we carry our own personal stuff, guilt, shame. But you also mentioned this broader cultural weight, this sense of maybe guilt or responsibility for historical things we weren't even alive for.
Yeah.
How do those two levels connect?
It's interesting how they can feed into each other. Our personal feelings of inadequacy, our private shames, they can get amplified by the weight of collective history. Historical wrongs, atrocities.
Yeah.
Our individual anxieties can get tangled up with this bigger cultural unease, and then attempts to resolve this guilt, maybe through activism or trying really hard to be seen as good, can sometimes, paradoxically, end up reinforcing the very systems that caused the guilt in the first place. It can become this constant need to prove your moral standing, a feedback loop.
Wow. Okay, this makes me think about some of the bigger trends we see, like our obsession with productivity, always needing to do more, or our need for constant validation on social media. Are these just larger scale symptoms of these unresolved inner conflicts?
That's a really insightful way to put it.
Yeah.
Yes, you could definitely see these societal obsessions as symptoms of a kind of cultural neurosis, collective attempts to deal with underlying anxieties.
So like?
Our relentless drive for achievement, our insatiable consumerism, this constant craving for likes and followers. Maybe these are all ways we try to fill a kind of void, a structural emptiness created by the tensions inherent in being civilized.
And where does technology fit in all this? Because it's supposed to connect us, right? Make life easier. But sometimes it feels like it just adds another layer, another kind of cage, maybe.
That's a great point. If we're talking about this invisible cage, technology, even as it offers progress and connection, often adds new dimensions to it. Well, smartphones keep us constantly connected, sure, but they can also pull us out of the present moment, away from the people right in front of us. Social media promises community, but often delivers comparison, anxiety, even isolation. And then there's surveillance tech. It offers security, maybe, but at the cost of privacy. And the really tricky part is how willingly we often participate in these systems, trading privacy for convenience or connection for entertainment.
It almost feels hopeless sometimes. Like any attempt to rebel, to push back against these pressures just gets swallowed up, absorbed. Counterculture becomes the new cool thing to sell.
That's a very sharp observation. It often happens, doesn't it? Movements that start out challenging the norms can get co-opted, turned into trends, commodified, and ultimately they might end up reinforcing the status quo, just in a slightly different package. New forms of control replace old ones, but the basic structure of the cage, well, it often persists.
So we're just left feeling this constant pull, this tension between what we maybe really want deep down and what society tells us we should want or how we should behave. It's like a perpetual balancing act.
Yeah.
And honestly, it can be pretty frustrating.
And the really crucial insight here, perhaps, is that this invisible cage, it isn't just something imposed on us from the outside, it's something we've collectively built. And we continue to maintain it, actively or passively. And the paradox is, just becoming aware of it doesn't automatically set you free. In fact, our awareness, our guilt, our internalized rules, they are part of what defines us. And knowing about the bars can, in a weird way, make them feel even stronger.
That leads me to think about the intense focus on identity today. Identity politics, defining ourselves by our groups, our struggles, our resistance. Does defining ourselves so rigidly actually help us break free? Or does it just lock us into a specific spot inside the cage?
That's a really complex and important question right now, isn't it? It touches on the nature of identity within this framework. If we define ourselves solely or primarily by our position relative to the system, whether as victims of it or rebels against it does that, maybe unintentionally, reinforce the system itself.
How so?
By claiming a specific position within the cage, it becomes a way of saying, this is my designated spot in the structure, rather than fundamentally questioning the structure itself, the enclosure.
It sounds like at the very heart of it all, there's this profound trade-off. Civilization gives us safety, security, comfort, a certain level of predictability.
Yes.
But the price is something essential, something about our spontaneous, maybe more authentic selves.
That seems to be the core bargain, doesn't it? Civilization, almost by definition, demands a sacrifice. It requires us to temper our wildness, our impulsiveness, our unfiltered desires, in exchange for social order, acceptance, belonging. But those parts we sacrifice, they don't just disappear cleanly, they linger, they echo, they manifest in neuroses, in art, in dreams, in unexpected eruptions. They're constantly reminding us, subtly or not so subtly, of what's been given up, even while we tell ourselves how much we've gained.
Wow.
And perhaps the most insidious aspect of this whole invisible cage is its ability to convince us that the constraints themselves, the very bars, are actually the source of our freedom.
So we've really taken a deep dive today into this idea of an invisible cage.
Sure.
How civilization, through this, maybe necessary, maybe not, suppression of instincts leads to this pervasive background hum of guilt, and how that shapes everything. Our morals, power dynamics, how we even see progress.
And what's truly thought-provoking, going back to your initial image, is to consider that those unseen backpacks aren't empty. They're filled with the cumulative weight of all this, generations of repression, inherited anxieties, the inherent cost of living together this way.
It absolutely makes you think differently about, well, everything. And maybe about those unseen burdens we all carry around. What might actually be inside your own invisible backpack. And maybe more importantly, how does just grappling with this idea, this hidden weight, change how you see the world around you? Or even how you see yourself? Definitely something to keep mulling over.